New mischief needed. What a depressing departure for the duo. And it looked it too, with Rock hunched on his partner's back and the fox dragging the saddest-looking bag of supplies alongside. They had spent much time and effort developing this particular plot, more than has been told, and been extremely confident of its success. But the meticulous Mischief had failed, regardless. And the gods of mischief, who are said to lurk in the hiding places of the highest hills and craggiest clouds, were giving no signs, at least none that could be deciphered. Not much was said on the way back, but once they reached the cottage lair, the pair stayed up to analyze their failure. It was impossible for a duo as dedicated and determined as this to simply fall asleep now, brushing these events aside. They had only one thought in their minds: to avenge this defeat and overcome the iron-forged foe. Of course, they had a lot more than one thought in their minds. Let's remember how clever they actually were. And so Rock set aglow the dual candles mounted on the stone throne and sitting by the softly lit model scene. The pair came to terms with the unfortunate results of the night, pondering what had happened and what had not. It seemed the perfect plan, said Rock. Train drivers are supposed to watch out for people, especially children, not run them down like track weeds. We had the perfect bait, not just an imitation, but the real thing. How could this have gone wrong? Not only did he not stop for the child, said Rutsnut, he didn't even make the slightest attempt, sounding a warning horn or whistle, or slowing the train's speed at all. I agree this is a most suspicious thing, said Rock. Are we sure the driver could see the boy? Said Rutsnut. I only ask because the drivers of these trains have daytime eyes like yours. I have a hard time knowing what exactly is visible at night with those things. The blazing headlamp lit the boy up like a lantern, said Rock. Add to that the flailing limbs of the bait. I'm certain even an old half-blind driver with soot-stuffed eyeballs must have seen him. Then why didn't he attempt to stop? Said Rutsnut. This might well be the key clue to the nature of this menace, said Rock. How do you mean? Said Rutsnut. What I mean, said Rock, is that we have been tackling this locomotive under the assumption that besides the entrancing light, some gadgetry of men we can't quite understand, it is fundamentally a standard train and crew, cruel and cattle-crushing, but still more or less the same as any other riding these rails. This may have been a false assumption. It would seem to me that no matter how menacing a train driver might be, he would always try to stop for a child on the track, even if he hated children. Even if while away he let his wife lure them into their cake-roofed cottage to throw in the oven, he would always stop. Why? Because if he was found to be guilty of running over children, he would not only lose his locomotive license for life, he would likely have no life to speak of, ending up hung dead by locals off a station platform clock as an example to all passing train drivers. His deed would be considered no less evil than luring boys and girls aboard a cake carriage train for that depraved wife of his to cook in the engine's furnace. Therefore, I conclude that we must reassess the exact nature of this threat. It may not be what it seems, or driven in normal fashion at all. Or is it possible there actually is no driver? Said Rutsnut. There was a time you once questioned the existence of a bridge and happened to be exactly half right. It would seem technically impossible, said Rock, for a train to drive without a driver, just as a gun could not be shot without a shooter, but it's possible the driver is not the driver we are thinking of. So in a way, yes. Then who or what is driving it? Said Rutsnut. You have nailed the essential question, said Rock. Until we know that, we may not know how to combat the machine. But that smoke seemed alive again tonight, violently alive. Once we might pass its movement off as a strange midnight swirl taking hold, but not twice. Yes, and not when the night winds were barely brushing fur, said Rutsnut. What we witnessed tonight was by no means natural. Add the entrancing headlamp, said Rock, that even from the beginning seemed to push the limits of cloth-back gadgetry, and it may be time to accept the fact that this train might not be entirely of this world. But if that's the case, said Rutsnut, then how do we even begin to thwart it? We might be dealing with forces far beyond even cloth-back capacities then. I recommend, said Rock, that we don't directly confront this foe again until we can be sure of what exactly we are facing off with. I don't see how we'll find that out though, said Rutsnut. Experts in menacing locomotives of metanatural mechanics aren't so easy to come by. And with that telling point, some sullen, silent moments passed. Then from the deep wooded places came a haunting sound, like echoing water drops in a well. Did you hear that? Said Rock. One of your cousins having a nightmare, said Rutsnut. That was none other than a raven's otherworldly call, said Rock. I think the gods of mischief have finally given us a sign. Wait, said Rutsnut. Where exactly are you going with this? Whether they are locomotive experts I can't say, said Rock. But I do know of some experts in metanatural matters who might well help us understand this dilemma. I think, my first-skulled friend, we should pay a visit to the brothers Wakakarax. It might now be necessary to add some spellcraft to our mischief. Rutsnut's face drooped. Not the raven sorcerers, he growled. Rock nodded. You heard the sign, he said. Could have been a sick sparrow, said Rutsnut, not believing a word of his own statement. Listen, crowbirds are difficult enough to handle without being saturated with spell. I'll never trust those conjuring corvids. Do you know of any fox wizards? Said Rock. Or cats, or hounds even. A rat sorcerer, perhaps, who turns wood chips to cheese. No, said Rudsnut, slashing his tail. Then I'm afraid it will have to be raven sorcerers, won't it? Said Rock. We agreed never to use them, said Rudsnut. We never agreed never to use them, said Rock, just never to use them for trivial things. Which is why we haven't requested fire-breathing throne ornaments or illusionary bricks for caching. But our position now is on the verge of desperate. They could really do those feats? Said Rudsnut. Probably, said Rock. The fox wasn't quite so convinced, but still wary enough of their abilities. Can't you just go alone, though? Said Rudsnut. No chance I'm visiting the casting croakers by myself, said Rock. If we bring the customary gifts, they should be safe enough to deal with, at least far safer than otherwise. Are you sure you still remember where they live? Said the fox, clinging to some hope he didn't. It's a long time since they taught you that at Rook School. We can't afford to get lost trekking across the world. I'm afraid I do, said Rock, and recited the knowledge passed down in lore to all crowbirds in the land. Where the sun's day ends, and the wild holds sway, scale the dark hill, with 2 heads and halfway, Crookenhole stands, fork-limbed and astray.